Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video I'll show you how I painted the Corvus Cabal CABALIST to a tabletop ready standard with contrast paint. Here's our CABALIST from the Corvus Cabal, my favourite warband, and another awesome miniature with real character and attitude walking by there. And in this video I'll show you how I painted him with the contrast paints, and we'll go through it pretty quick, but if you want something a little bit slower and with more feathers, then check out the Shrike Talon video, which is a lot longer, almost real time, and that will give you a good idea how to paint all the members of the Corvus Cabal. Right, let's get started. So here's our CABALIST, all primed, and for the primer I used the Citadel colour Wraithbone spray, and this is the contrast undercoat, and then to assemble the miniature I used the Citadel plastic glue. The paints we'll be mostly using are the Citadel colour contrast paints with a couple of layer paints for dry brushing and things like that. And then the brush I use mostly is the Army Painter Wargamer character brush, which is great for this kind of painting. But I'm also starting to use the Kalinsky No. 2 brush a lot, and I'm really liking that. And on to our first paint, which is the Contrast Wildwood. And we're going to put this on all the wooden handles of the weapons. And this is a great, nice dark coloured wood paint that works really well, and with most of these contrast paints, all these are going to be one coat, and so one nice thick coat of wildwood is give us a real nice wood effect. And this is going to contrast nicely with the lighter, more kind of yellowy brown that we'll use with the leather paint, the snakebite leather that we're putting on the leather straps. And with this I'm just loading my brush up and then getting a nice coat on there, really getting it into the recesses. And on these bits they're quite thin and there's no creases or anything like that, but I'm still trying to start and end my brush where I want most of that paint to pool, and where it meets the different parts of like the hand you want a little bit of shadow there. So I try and wipe the paint off there to start with, and then use my brush to push and pull the contrast paint around and then spread it evenly all over the handle of the spear there. And just, you've got plenty of time to work with this paint. And now we're moving on to that snakebite leather, and this is another great contrast paint, and this is one nice coat again, and I'm loading my brush up, starting in there where I want the most of the paint to pool, and you can see there's a little crease there, and the paint naturally wants to go into those creases on its own, so it does a lot of the work for you, and you just got to guide it, push it around, pull it, drag it into those recesses, and then use the creases to like wipe the paint off almost, so that it starts to build up in those darker areas of shadow. And then if you find it's pooling on the areas where you want it to be more highlighted, just take the paint off your brush on some paper towel and then just wick away some of that paint, or just like move it around. And you can see there I put quite a lot on, and then I'm wiping my brush against the miniature to take that paint off, and then once the paint's on the model I'm just spreading it around with the brush. And using these larger brushes here are much easier than using a small brush, and gives you a lot more control and keeps a lot more paint there as well. Right, now we're on to Black Templar, and this is a one coat again, and this is going to go on all the feathers. So I'm putting this on mostly the small feathers and the big bulk of them on the back there that looks like a little backpack of collection of feathers going on. But I'm not painting the larger feathers that poke out from the bottom and from the sides, because I want to give them a different colour and just to break it up a little bit so that we don't just have a mass of black feathers going on. And here I'm also doing the hair as well, so that's going to be with the black. And then we'll break this up with a different colour that you'll see a little later on. And again, with this I'm putting a bit more paint on now when I'm doing the feathers, because there's a lot of recesses and the paint's going to be soaked up and we'll want to run in there, so I'm really putting a lot on now. Okay, now I'm taking that Black Templar and some Pterodon turquoise, and I'm mixing 1 part turquoise to 1 part black, and then I'm using this for those larger feathers that poke out, and I'm really trying to get the paint in the recess of the feather so that we get a nice little shadow going on, and also where the feathers meet the other smaller feathers I'm trying to get a bit more paint there too. And so I'm giving them a nice coat, and then just making sure it's not building up on the raised areas of the feathers, and also towards the edges I want those a little bit thinner. And now I'm also taking that same mix, and I'm going to go over the black smaller feathers with this, but I'm not putting too much paint on. It's almost like a little glaze, and this is going to give us a little bit of variety. And now moving on to some base paint, the ceramite white, and any white paint is going to do, but ideally you want to use the same colour wraithbone that you used on the undercoat, but I don't have any of that, so I'm going to use the white, and that's going to work just fine. And this is going to be to tidy up all the spaces where I've painted over the lines, and having these nice crisp lines is one of the keys, I think, to getting the contrast paint looking really neat. So I often go through this stage, any time I go over those lines, I'll tidy it up with some white paint like this before moving on with the next colour, and that makes it look nice and crisp. So now it's some contrast Space Wolves grey, and this is going to be for the trousers. And you can see here, I'm really putting a lot of paint on now. So the brush is really full of paint, and I'm pushing it on into those recesses and then moving it around just with the tip of my brush and making sure we get a nice thick line where it meets the belt and the areas of shadow. And now this is one of the contrast paints where we'll do 2 coats. So we'll put this first coat on nice and thick all over, and then we'll let it dry completely and then come back for a second coat. And you can see with this Space Wolves grey, it kind of builds up in the recesses dark, but on the raised areas it's really pale, and so we want it to be a little bit darker, a bit more bluer, to represent almost like a kind of denim material. And so it's going to definitely need 2 coats. So I'm going all over there, making sure I get in those little bits as well around the bottom. And again, if we go over the edges, I'll make sure I tidy it up with that white paint. And now you can see that's completely dried, and I'm going back with the second coat, and that's going to give us a nice deeper blue. And already you can see that's a lot nicer now on the raised areas, certainly, and the shadow, that's going to keep it nice and contrasted. And now we're going to move on to the next paint, which is a base paint again, that's ceramite white. And this is here I'm tidying up again. So this stage I do quite a lot, and I go back and forth between this. And this really makes a huge difference, just having those crisp lines to work with. So I'm going along there where it meets the flesh colour. And now once that white's completely dry, I get some contrast Guilliman flesh. And now this is going to go over all the flesh areas, the hands, the legs, the chest. And I'm putting quite a lot on because I want it to be quite dark, almost tanned. So I'm filling that brush up. I'm really pushing it in. And again, just starting and ending my brush strokes where I want most of the paint to build up. And so in there where the muscles are kind of have got the little recesses, we want the paint in there, but we don't want too much on the edge building up. And so I'm really pushing it in and just using my brush to push and pull the paint and guide it along. And you can see there's plenty of time. Once it's on there, it doesn't dry that quickly, so you've got plenty of time to move it around. But once it's in place and you've got it where you want it, just leave it alone and then let that contrast paint do the work for you, and trust that it will dry and leave the nice shaded areas, but also the nice areas of highlight. And there we go, I'm also doing the face, so I'm getting quite a bit here. I'm putting a big blob in the eye sockets of this kind of bone mask, and really getting it in there so we've got a nice shadow. And then going over the hands. And with this, if you go over the wood, you often find with the Guilliman flesh it doesn't show up, which is good, so you haven't got to worry about tidying that up. And now I just grabbed a little bit of Volupus pink contrast, and while that flesh paint is still wet, I'm just dotting it on where they've got the feathers in, because they're kind of hooked into their skin, which is pretty grim. But this is going to just show that that's a bit sore. Right, now we're on to some contrast skeleton horde. And I use this for the bindings they've got around the bottom of the trousers. And I also use it for the beak. So I'm putting it all on these bits at the same time. And now on the beak, I'm putting quite a lot. This dries quite pale, but if you can get a lot of it into the recesses, you get a really nice shadow from it. So I'm putting quite a bit in there, pushing it in, trying not to let it go into the eye socket, because I want to keep that Guilliman flesh coming through. But I certainly want to get it in all the other little holes of the beak. And now while it's wet, I'm going back to some black Templar, and I'm putting a little dollop on the end. I'm wiping my brush to get that paint off. And then I'm going to let those two paints, while they're both wet, just kind of bleed into each other. And this is going to give us a nice kind of natural look, and it's going to give us a little natural fade between the black and that bone. And it's almost going to look like it's been sun bleached. They've painted it a little bit with some black perhaps, but it's going to give a nice look to it. And you'll see that it almost gives its own little edge highlight on the tip of that beak, and this works really good. So I'm doing that on both sides and just putting the paint on the end the most, and then using my brush just to push it up, and then let those two paints bleed into each other, and just feather it out a little bit, and that's all there is to it. So that's the beak done. And now we're going to take some base lead belcher, and I like to use the lead belcher for metal work like this. This is going to go on all the spear and also this kind of pick or axe that he's got in his other hand. And these are great weapons that the Corvus Cabal have got, and they're my favourite warband by far. Just the whole look of them, they're awesome. The lore behind them, their abilities are really cool, and I just like everything about them. Really great. And these are the set that actually got me into Warcry back last year. So yeah, I really like these, and these weapons are really great. But I'm also putting some of that paint on the belt buckle as well, and this will be the base. And then we're going to let this dry completely. And now I'm going to take some Flesh Tearers Red, and this is just going to go over the little metal like chaos badge that they wear. They've either got this on their neck or on a weapon. And then some next paint is the technical paint, the Typhus Corrosion. And now this lead belch has got to be completely dry. And then I'm putting on a fair amount of this Typhus Corrosion, and then putting it all over the metalwork and just wiping it away from the bits that I know are going to be sharp. And then I've gone for some Ceramite White again. And again, this belt buckle is completely dry. And I'm going to go over that little skull that they've got there as like a relief on it. And just going over all the little bits that are like sticking out and poking up. And then I'm going to go to some Stormhost Silver. And then this is going to be for the edge highlighting of the weapons. And we want these weapons to look old and grungy, but they've got to be sharp. So this really kind of points that out for us and shows that the weapons can do some damage if they get them in the right place. So, and this is a nice bright silver, and I really like the silver to do this edge highlighting. But I'm starting to dry brush on these weapons now on some other miniatures. Okay, now it's time for some Contrast Agorist Dunes, and when that white's completely dry, I go over that whole belt buckle with it, and that's going to make the metal look a little bit more golden, but it's also going to make the white skull to look more like a skull. And then it's time for some technical Blood for the Blood God, and this is a great finish for these miniatures, and they have this blood all around the neck and on the chest, and so this paint is like a technical paint that leaves it glossy almost, so it always looks like shiny blood. We're on to the final stage with some Sky Grey from Vallejo, and I've got this makeup brush by Very Vegan, and this is a really soft brush, and we're going to do some dry brushing now. And so I'll work it into the bristles and get lots of paint on the brush, but then get off as much as I can on some paper towel. And you can see there I'm really pushing it in, but then wiping off as much as I can to get that nice and dry. And then we're going to use this on the feathers, and this will be one of the finishing parts. And here I'm just going over all those feathers and just giving it a nice dry brush, and that's going to bring out lots of the detail and really give a nice finish to these. You could just leave it black and that turquoise, but I think this little dry brush here of the grey really brings it to life and works really well on that turquoise colour too. And then this will be our finished miniature now, and here he is, our Cabalist, all ready for battle to a tabletop ready standard with contrast paints. Really happy how he turned out, and I especially like this Typhus Corrosion and Blood for the Blood God. I'm really enjoying using these technical paints. And this method I've used for all the Cabalists and even the Spire Stalkers and pretty much the other two as well, the Shrike Talon. So, and the base, if you want to make the bases, I've done a separate video on that, so you can check that out too, and that shows you exactly how I did it. And then here's our Shadow Piercer and the other members of the warband, and I've done a separate video for her, and again that's a little bit longer than this one, which goes almost real time, so you can see in great detail and a bit more slower how that was done, and also for the Shrike Talon. I'll put links to all the paints I used in the description below, and there'll be affiliate links to Element Games, but they won't cost you anything extra. In fact, you can save up to 20% with Element Games, and for every sale made through an affiliate link, I get a small commission, and that's going to help me develop the channel. So thanks so much for that support, I really appreciate it. Let me know what you think about the Corvus Cabal and the contrast paint methods in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. I hope this video was helpful, and thanks so much for watching. Please like if you like it, subscribe for more videos like these, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to join me next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games.